mine, process and craft rockets to serve democracy and spread your factory grow across the whole world. And use it in reactors to generate power. I will break down all types of electricity production in Factorio, so you will learn about steam power plants, solar fields, nuclear and fusion generators with example builds and awesome blueprints to get you ready for vanilla and space age. I will mainly focus on nuclear power plants, because they are more complicated than my accent. You know, you have to understand how to mine uranium with sulfuric acid, refine it in centrifuges, do Kovarex processing and design the whole nuclear plant. But no worries, comrade, after this video you will know more about uranium fusion than Oppenheimer himself, Soviet Russia and even more than Jeff. Who the hell is Jeff? Without any further ado, let's start from breaking down all the power sources in Factorio. There are 4 different power sources in the game, and all of them have pros and cons. You have to decide what type of electricity production is the best for your factory. Some power sources work better in the early game, some are cheaper and some produce a lot of pollution. That's why choosing the wrong one might enter your factory in a blackout loop, and fixing it will be a pain in the neck. I've also prepared blueprints for all the power sources I'm gonna talk about, but it's always better to understand the stuff from the video instead of just brainlessly copying and pasting blueprints. Okay, let's start with the steam. The simplest and the most popular solution to generate electricity is the steam power produced in boilers. It consumes water and any type of fuel to produce steam, which is then converted into electricity. This is also the only electricity production you can build from the very beginning, and it should remain as an early game solution, because as soon as you start expanding your factory, you will get access to better technology. When it comes to pros of boilers, it's definitely the easiest to set up, since you just need to remember a ratio of 1 boiler per 2 steam engines. Besides this, you can customize it according to your needs. Boilers and steam engines are also very cheap and easy to craft, which makes them even more accessible for new players. However, the biggest problem with steam power is the amount of generated pollution. A small power plant is literally enough to cause cancer in the area of, yes, pollution triggers biter attacks and makes them overall stronger, so sometimes it's great to be a really good guy and care about the environment. Slavery is of course the best way to produce coal for your power plant. Just install a mining drones mod, otherwise you have to use vanilla drills or the space age ones. The next power generator is a thermal bank in Arknights Endfield. Build your own industrial empire by playing as a cute anime waifu. Arknights Endfield is a 3D real-time strategy RPG with intensive battles and deep factory building mechanics. Touch the virtual grass, gather all the rocks, automate the mining and industrialize the land into a beautiful working factory. Research new technologies to optimize your production, cook spaghetti from the waifu perspective or design everything from top-down view. The game of course supports blueprints which you can copy and share with your homies. Turn craft materials into new gear pieces and use it to upgrade your combat operators. Explore the beautiful world and crush even the toughest bosses with powerful abilities and ultimates. The new update, All Deep Water Dies by Rising Tide It Is the Night, just went live, and it adds a brand new area, Queen Boss Stockade in Wuling, to explore. It also introduces Lebastic water-based automation, new rocks to mine and overall expand on the factory management mechanics. Thank you Arknights Endfield for sponsoring this video, and you download the game for free on PC, PlayStation 5 or even your mobile device. Click the link below and build your own factory today. Solar power will be your second option to produce electricity, because you will unlock it very quickly with just red and green science packs. Since it's simply making free electricity without producing any pollution, you can just slap a few solars in your base and reduce the electricity bill during the day. But if you want to go full solar, you also have to place accumulators, which will provide electricity during the night. They are slightly harder to craft since they require a working refinery, but it shouldn't be a problem if you watch my refinery tutorial, right? The perfect ratio of solars and accumulators is 25 25 solar panels to 21 accumulators. Those numbers are based on the novice duration of day, and you simply have to remember them if you are planning to design your own solar field instead of using my blueprints. Like I said before, solars are great because they do not produce any pollution. However, they take an enormous amount of space to produce electricity. So you will turn 90% of your spaghetti into solar field, which sounds like a luck-making solution, but actually is the best solution performance-wise. Once built, a solar field has no performance impact, making it the best power source for very long playthroughs, like 200 hours plus, or if you can't afford a new PC with current prices. When it comes to those who play with mods, you have to calculate ratios on your own, because with mods there is countless of solar types, qualities and even more planets with different sun strength. But try and error is always your best friend. The next power source is a nuclear power plant, which uses water and uranium fuel rods to produce clean and cheap electricity. This technology requires red, green and blue science packs to research, so you need an already working factory to start with it. But it's still just 3 science packs. A big advantage of nuclear plant is how small it is compared to other power generators, especially when you look at huge solar fields. Also, nuclear doesn't produce pollution on its own. I mean, the machines that provide it with fuel produce pollution, but it's a marginal amount, since you need a tiny amount of uranium to operate a reactor. However, like in real life, building a reactor comes with a massive upfront cost and a fairly complicated design. On top of that, you will need to gather uranium and process it into fuel. You know, designing and building a nuclear plant is like assembling furniture from IKEA. Everything goes smoothly until it doesn't, and you start summoning Swedish demons. But okay, let's give you some example ratios. For a simple 2x2 reactor, you need 4 reactors, 48 heat exchangers, 83 steam turbines, and enough heat pipes to connect everything together. Or you can use my blueprint for the best design. But there is no fun in this approach, so I will go more in depth about explaining how you can design a reactor yourself later on in the video. Fusion is the power source introduced in the Factorio space age expansion and is the most advanced and the most late-game solution for making electricity. However, it's a content only available in the DLC, so if you are playing vanilla, you don't have access to it. That's why I won't focus too much on it and simply read you the dev's description, since it's well explained. The fusion system makes a lot of power in a relatively small amount of space, since the coolant is recycled and the fusion power cells are very energy dense. The system requires very little in terms of input to keep going. This makes the system good on space platforms due to the small footprint, low input and high output. It's nice to be able to blast through space on a space platform that isn't limited by power. So if you need compact, extremely late-game power solution, fusion is the best answer. Small reactor is enough to provide electricity even for huge spaceship, and big reactors can supply the whole planet with sufficient amount of electricity. Initially, you have to provide reactor with coolant, but then you can recycle it infinitely, and the only outside resource which is needed is a power cell. To craft fusion reactors and fusion power cells, you need to build a factory on Aquila, which makes it the most late-game power source in the game. While building the reactor, don't get confused where is input and output for plasma, since you need direct connection without any use of pipes to make it work. Now let's get deep into uranium processing. Production chain of uranium is a bit more complicated than just smelting iron or copper, but it's not a black magic. So let's break it down from the end product. To run a nuclear plant, you need to produce fuel rods. To craft them, you need 10 iron, 19 dark uranium and a single light heavy uranium. When it comes to crafting fuel rods, I highly recommend you to invest into a single tier 3 assembler filled with productivity modules tier 3, because instead of crafting 10 fuel cells, you will be crafting extra 10 cells every 2.5 cycle. So you'll basically craft 14 cells per crafting, and that's a huge save in resources. Since crafting speed of fuel cells is never a bottleneck, this single assembler will last you for the whole game. And maybe even more. What the fuck? There are two types of uranium in Factorio, and they behave kind of similar like they do in real life. First is a uranium 238, which I call dark or sad uranium. It's very easy to get when you process rough uranium in centrifuge. You literally get it 99.3% of times. Second uranium is uranium 235, which I call light uranium or happy rocks, because you can do happy stuff with them. This type of uranium is far less common, with a mere 0.7% yield from processing rough ore. Even so, this uranium is more unstable than blue-haired feminist, it won't explode on its own. I hope at least. Reactors need a steady fuel supply, and a single centrifuge processing rough uranium ore can produce enough uranium to support one reactor. So there is not much need for building tons of centrifuges, if you plan to use it only for small electricity production. However, there are other use cases for uranium, and you want to produce 40 light uranium quite early on to kickstart the Kovarex process. My recommendation would be to start by building at least 5 centrifuges for rough uranium in a very small base, or at least 10 if you progress quickly. To provide enough rough uranium for a single centrifuge, you need 3 miners, but personally I wouldn't count any miners and just fill the closest uranium ore patch with as many drills as possible, or with enough slaves if you want to support child labor. Uranium is a unique ore which requires sulfuric acid to be mined. Luckily miners connect with each other, so you just need to connect few drills with pipes and the rest will be distributed on its own. There are 2 solutions to get sulfuric acid from a refinery to the mining outpost. The simpler solution is to just lay down underground pipes from the refinery to uranium outpost. I recommend this solution if uranium is quite near the refinery, like up to 300 tiles, or if you are too lazy to set up trains. Train solution is harder to start with, because you have to build input and output station for sulfuric acid, but on a long run it's way better option, because you can scale it easily with the growth of your factory. A train station for sulfuric acid is not that hard to build. Just place a train stop, name it in a meaningful way, place pumps and put some tanks for storage. Output station is basically the same, just flip the pumps and it's done. You can also use a single train for transport of sulfuric acid and uranium ore, but it's more complicated with its logic and I wouldn't bother with that. By the way, sulfuric acid is just sulfur, iron and water, very simple to craft in your refinery. Uranium can be used not only to make electricity, but also as a fuel for your trains, or as a talking tool whenever you want to negotiate some stuff with the biters. Dark uranium rocks can be transformed into uranium bullets and cannon shells. They deal a lot of damage to locals and are easy to craft if you are ready with a running uranium processing. Happy rocks are harder to get, but you can also make better stuff with them. Nuclear fuel is the best fuel in vanilla Factorio, because it increases max speed of vehicles to up 115% of base value and increases the acceleration speed to 250%, which makes your trains way more dynamic on intersections. Since car and tank are also a vehicle, you can put nuclear fuel into them and run through poles quicker. Other use case for happy rocks are happy green rockets. They are very powerful and makes clearing biters in the late game extremely easy and quick. However, you need 30 light rocks to craft a single rocket, or 100 if you are playing Space Age. So don't even try to craft green rockets before you kickstart the mythical Kovarex process. And talking about Kovarex, turning uranium 238 into uranium 235 is an extremely hard process in real life. This is why in Factorio we have an imaginary process of purifying uranium. It's named after the creator of Factorio, Kovarex. Recipe to purify uranium require 40 light uranium rocks and 5 dark uranium. After the recipe is done, you will get 41 light uranium and 2 dark uranium back. With a crafting time of 1 minute, you are producing 1 light uranium a minute, which is a lot when compared to processing of rough uranium ore, which yields on average just 1 light rock every 28.5 minutes. The biggest problem with Kovarex process is kickstarting it with 40 heavy rocks, because one centrifuge processing uranium will need 19 hours to produce 40 light uranium. This is why it's good to start processing uranium early on and just stockpile it to use later in a Kovarex process. Many people don't use nuclear power before they acquire those 40 light rocks. But I don't recommend it, because basic 2x2 reactor can generate around 500 megawatts of power, and it needs fuel from fewer than 4 centrifuges processing rough ore to keep running. So if you build 10 centrifuges, you can use nuclear power from the gecko and still get those 40 light rocks after around 3 hours of playtime, which is a no time in Factorio. Kovarex process might be also very tricky to set up, because it produces 2 types of outputs which might get mixed on the belt and stack everything. The simplest way to build a processing setup is to build a belt and put output and input inserters next to each other. This way, whenever recipe is done, centrifuge will self-feed itself with resources. You also have to supply it with fresh dark uranium to keep the process working. I highly recommend you to play around with your own Kovarex setup instead of using any blueprints, since it's simply an interesting puzzle to solve. You have to balance mixed rock input and output, supply correct rocks, and just make sure nothing gets stuck. It's just small light introduction to horrors you will find on Gleba. So you want to design your own reactor, right? You think you can do it. You think you're good, better than everybody else. You might be right, or you might fail, I don't care. Anyway, to build a reactor, you first need the reactor itself. It generates heat, which must be transferred to heat exchangers through heat pipes. Heat exchangers will transform provided heat and water into steam, which then has to be used in steam turbines. If you want, you can also store steam in tanks to use it during nights when your solars don't work, or to run your reactors only from time to time and save on fuel. Because if you don't know already, reactors always use their fuel, even when they are at full temperature. Before Factorio 2.0, it was extremely hard to move steam around, due to the throughput limits, and buffering steam was very difficult. Now with instant pipe transfer, it's way easier to do, but you still have to consider if it's really worth the effort. Here is a list of all ratios you need to build a reactor. You better write them down or save the timestamp if you want to come back to it later. The ratios are not as simple as one reactor per X amount of heat exchangers and turbines, because of the neighbor bonus. In Factorio, whenever you build reactors, you want to place them close to each other, so that you get additional power output for the same amount of fuel. This happens because Factorio reactors follow real physics, and this one rule is called apes together strong, or something like that. I'm not really into physics. Basically, for every reactor homie, they will get 100% more heat, which you can then transform into electricity. This is why 2x is the best layout, since it allows access to every reactor and maximizes power output. I personally prefer to build an expandable reactor to get as much efficiency as possible, but many people simply make smaller reactors and build them next to each other. You can choose whichever approach you prefer when designing your own power plant. Even so, I recommend you to come up with your own spaghetti designs. I prepared you a few electricity blueprints, so if you are lazy like a bag of chips, you can just paste them and call it a day. There are few blueprints for the steam power. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the late game steam power, but you do you. For the solar power, there is a nice looking blueprint with perfect ratio of solars and accumulators. By default, it snaps to the map grid, so it's hard to place it in a perfect spot in the base, but it's meant to be used from the map view, and it makes it so much easier to place. It's worth to mention that since Factorio 2.0, roboports work as radars, so this blueprint will be all what you need. Other blueprints are designed for the nuclear power plant. Here is a simple Kovarex enrichment process. It will make sure you always have enough happy green rocks for reactor and your biter neighbors. You just input the mixed rocks output straight from the ore centrifuges, and the blueprint will work on its own. It makes 30 light uranium per minute, which is a lot, but you can easily expand it with forced blueprint placement. When it comes to building a reactor itself, there are few blueprints for it. First one is a starter. You place it to start the reactor. It has everything built in. Your job is to supply it with water and nuclear fuel by boats or belts. When you are starting to run low on power, you have to use another blueprint for an extra 640 megawatts of electricity. Place the blueprint in a way that reactors are kissing each other like good homies, and make sure their pipes are connected. Then use forced blueprint placement to automatically replace the fuel belt. When you get to Roboport, you have to use a Roboport blueprint, which will make sure the whole reactor is in the robot's range. And this is the best reactor you can build. But if you run into any problems with setting up your reactor, or you need friends, feel free to join our Discord server with more than 8,000 of active Factorio players. Also, whenever I come up with more blueprints, I will update the book. So at this point you know everything about electricity in Factorio. But do you know how trains work, how to do smelting, main bus, science packs, oil and many more? If not, then go watch my whole series of ultimate tutorials, which was made thanks to the support of my lovely members. Thank you for watching and see you in a nuclear winter.